All right, awesome. Welcome everyone to 2030, a vision for electric mobility in Western Maine. This is part of the Center for an Ecology-Based Economy's 6th annual Solar and EV Expo, celebrating National Drive Electric Week. My name is Renee, and I am CB's Communications and Project Coordinator. Our mission at CB is to engage the community in developing practical ecological solutions in the areas of food, shelter, energy, and especially tonight, transportation. Before we get going, I would like to acknowledge that we are here today on land once nurtured by the Wabanaki people, here specifically the Arasaguntukuk, who for millennia lived in cooperation with this now shattered ecosystem. We're still fighting for their sovereignty, and to whom we owe an unfathomable debt. If you haven't caught our other Solar and EV Expo events this week, you can find those on our website and on Facebook. I'll put a link in the chat in a moment. So you can catch up on all the other great content we've had this week. We've got some more virtual test drives of local electric cars coming shortly, so keep an eye out for those. If you're new to Zoom, please keep yourself muted during the presentation. There'll be a chance for plenty of questions and answers and banter afterwards. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat as a written format, or like I say, at the end, you have a chance to speak up and voice them. We are recording this, so if you don't want your video to be part of the recording, you can turn your video off. We want to take a moment to thank our event sponsors for the week. We have Paris Auto Barn, Lee Auto Malls, Revision Energy, Garbo Integrated Solar Builders, Power Market, NextAmp, Seacoast e-bikes, and Plug-in America. Additionally, we're doing some raffle prizes we'll be drawing next week. By showing up tonight, your name goes in the hat. So watch our newsletter for the potential to win some gift cards to some local area businesses. I'll also put a link in the chat if you're not on our newsletter yet, but would like to be. So I'm going to turn things over to Scott Vlaun, our Executive Director here at CB, and he's going to get the show on the road.
Thank you, Renee. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks Barry and Fred for showing up. They're the regulars in this, and some of the pioneers in this whole electric mobility world. I am going to just share a few slides to kind of give a little background on CB's work in transportation in general. We also, we've been doing a lot on the electric vehicle side, but we've also have a couple other projects. I'm just going to share a few slides very quickly, and then Barry's going to share a few slides and kind of set some background for what we're up against to try to reduce our emissions where we need to get them by 2030 and what that might look like. And then Fred Garbo, who is on CB's advisory board, and I like to call our local EVangelist, the first EV owner in Maine. And I think he owns about 3 or 4 of them now and counting, and has all powered by solar power. And he's going to talk about his experience. And he's also been to some of the big EV expos around the world and has really had a chance to look at the future of electric mobility. So I'm going to share a few slides, see if this works here. Oops, share screen. Do that. Well, that worked a few minutes ago. There we go. Working?
Yep.
All right. So yeah, welcome to our 6th annual Solar and EV Expo, virtual this year. And I just thought that you might want to see what this looked like last year. Last year we had 40 electric vehicles and a whole bunch of e-bikes over at the high school where we've been doing this for the last couple of years. And we were pretty disappointed to not be able to do that this year, but we are definitely having some fun with it. And I hope we have some fun with it tonight. And one of the big reasons we're talking about this is because transportation is the biggest carbon polluter we have in the state of Maine. Over 54% of our emissions come from the transportation sector. So the Maine Climate Council is focusing hard on transportation, and a lot of us are as well, to try to really transform this as quickly as we can. So our goals, CB transportation goals, basically the obvious one, we need to reduce fossil fuel consumption and switch over to electric. But we also need to promote walking and cycling, and we'll talk a little bit more about cargo bikes, but we feel like that's a real option to replace a lot of car trips. We need public transportation. Maine spends $1 for every person per year on public transportation. A state like Vermont's spending $12. So we need to really up our transportation spending, public transportation spending. And Barry's going to talk a little bit about how that could be electric and how that's actually happening. We need to create EV infrastructure and e-bike infrastructure, and just bike infrastructure in general. And CB's done some work on the EV infrastructure, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then this whole notion of carpooling and bike pooling, which may sound kind of silly, but it's a lot of people will commute and will feel a lot safer commuting on a bike if they're with other cyclists. So getting cyclists organized. And then this whole notion of bike and car sharing. We have a bike share program here, which I'll show a couple slides of. And one of our visions is to have some car sharing, have a little pod of electric cars like out behind CB that people can sign on to. Again, Vermont's kind of leading the way in that, but so everybody doesn't necessarily need to own a car, but we can share these share cars. So this is our community bike share program. Was one of our pilot projects we started at CB. Unfortunately, it's on hold this year because of COVID. But basically the model there was we got a lot of donated bikes. We fixed them all up. We had a lot of skill sharing around fixing bikes, teaching people how to fix flats, adjust their brakes, stuff like that to make them more comfortable on the road. And we put this fleet of bikes out on the road. Since then, we've actually bought some bikes, and it's really helped a lot of the people in town here increase their mobility and get more bikes on the road, which the more bikes we have on the road, more we're going to calm traffic. We've also been really fortunate. We had a funder, thanks to Barry, actually, sent a funder our way that was really interested in seeing an EV charging network in this part of Maine. And since this, we inaugurated this EV Expo, we've actually installed 15 chargers in the state, mostly within about a 30-mile radius of Norway. And you can kind of see this map here. The red ones, the green ones are existing, and you can see Norway South Paris has this cluster. We've got chargers here in Norway. We've got a big cluster in South Paris that we put in. And then we started putting individual chargers in surroundings. So all those red dots you see that were planned are now executed. And even one of the proposed ones out in Freiburg we've got in. So we've still got work to do, but we've got 15 and counting on the chargers. This is kind of one of our flagship stations. This is over at the high school. And Garbo put in this solar tracker that powers two 40 amp chargers, J1772s, and an 80 amp Tesla charger. And we've got the same setup here in Norway, also offset by solar power, but this charging station has gotten really popular in Norway, and those 12 solar panels aren't enough to offset. So we're looking at ways to offset that even more. That is the same setup, two standard chargers and a Tesla charger. In the transportation realm, another one of our projects is Spoke Folks, and this is, as you can see here, Western Foothills Cargo Bike Cooperative. This was our kind of pre-launch where we kind of jump-started the launch of the project so we could deliver one of the worker owners of the cooperative that's getting some practice on hauling trash, and we're going to actually be doing our first pilot runs with trash hauling in a couple of weeks. This is the very first EV Expo we ever had. So this is 6 years ago. And you see that fancy ribbon and all the fanfare. We had one 20 amp charger that was donated to us by Revision Energy because we had helped them with a solar farm. And if you look over there on the right, there's Barry holding his pad, getting ready to to get up there and talk about the future of electric mobility. And all the way around the left with his hand on his hip, there's Fred Garbo, and we're going to be hearing from both of those guys here shortly. We've also really embraced e-bikes from early on. And this is at one of our EV expos, an e-bike thing, where people brought e-bikes. Like our local bike shop had like one e-bike. But this year, e-bike scene really turned into some mayhem out here in our back parking lot. And we had Seacoast e-bikes bring a bunch of cargo bikes, and we had people carting kids around on them. We had people carting adults around on them. We had people hauling giant loads around on them. And it was super exciting to see this possibility as well. And there's Steve Gerhartz from Seacoast e-bikes with his collection that he dragged up here in that trailer. Was here for a Friday evening and Saturday morning, and we all had a lot of fun. And actually, Steve is with us tonight, and just going to talk about this whole e-bike revolution and this cargo bike revolution a little bit. So that's where CV's been and kind of where we're going. And I will stop sharing, and maybe Steve wants to say a few words about that, his e-bike project he's got going down there in Seacoast and around Portsmouth, and then we'll move on to Barry. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Scott, how you doing? Hello, everybody, and thanks for doing this. And it's hopefully we can keep spreading this more and more and more. And what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing, and I've been about a little over 3 years doing a real deep dive into electric bikes. And I first started out mainly because I bought one and I found how it changed my life from a physical activity standpoint. And then without even realizing what I was doing, I was finding that my truck would sit in the driveway sometimes for weeks at a time because I was just using the bike to go and do my shopping, a couple miles away. My wife would say, well, what's for dinner? And I'd get on the bike and I'd go past about 6 or 7 stores that I could buy whatever we wanted for dinner here in Kittery Point, and I'd go all the way down into the south side of Portsmouth to the Hannaford just because it was a fun ride. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, is like, okay, well, this isn't just recreation, this is transportation. And we're certainly seeing it accelerate much more in the big urban areas. When I talk to these manufacturers that are of cargo bikes, they make it pretty clear that the areas down in Massachusetts, Somerville, Cambridge, Boston, there's a shop down in Somerville called Bicycle Bell, who's the largest urban aero dealer in the country, and they're just killing it. And what's happening, as tragic as COVID has been, one of the upsides of it has been and I think this will continue. We're going to see a lot of people who used to go into offices or into these meeting pods, or where you go in and rent a space with a group of other people, you rent a desk and you share office space. That certainly it'll come back, but I don't think it's ever going to come back to the degree that it was. And what we're seeing is people are transitioning and working more from home. And I'm sure everybody sees that. So what I've had happen here, I've seen here, we have customers recently that have actually sold their cars and bought bikes because one of the two in the household is home during the day working and not even taking the kids to school. And there's just no need for the car to go to a 4 or 5 or 6 mile trip to buy groceries or whatever else you got to do, go to the hardware store or whatever. And I'm seeing more and more of that. Clearly in the big areas, in the urban areas, we're seeing that. One of the things, the perspectives I have is most of my career was in the retail automotive business at a fairly high level. And one of the headwinds that electric vehicles has is the auto dealers. And the reason they're pushing back is because most auto dealers don't make a lot of money. They make, if anything, they make nothing on the sale of new cars. I mean, new cars for many dealers are a losing proposition. They do make some money on used cars, but parts and service is the big revenue generator. And what we know about electric vehicles is that they require less parts and less service. If there's data out there that shows a typical internal combustion automobile has something like 10,000 or 5,000, whatever it is, moving parts, and a Tesla's got 102. And so there's not going to be the oil changes, and there's not going to be all these other maintenance items that are going to be done. So the dealers are terrified, and I've had dealers tell me this. They're terrified of electric vehicles, and they're pushing back somewhat on the factories. But the factories recognize long term that it's going that way. BMW, for instance, is abandoning all internal combustion research. I believe it's in 2022 or 2023. And there's a number of other manufacturers following that. But the car dealers themselves are the ones that are going to hold this thing back in terms of the adoption. The people are going to get it, but they're going to continue to push internal combustions for their own benefit. And that I think is a big headwind. And the other one, as Scott said earlier, is infrastructure. I mean, down here on the coast, southern coast in Portsmouth, the infrastructure here there isn't any, is what I should say. It's really, and a lot of that has to do with just the fact that this is this area was settled so many years ago in the 1600s, and many of the buildings and houses and shops were built very close to the street because nobody wanted to shovel snow 100 yards to get out. So there's a real limitation. It's very much like Europe. There's a real limitation as to how the streets can be expanded to accommodate both vehicles and bikes. And the reality of it is, which people are having a hard time accepting, is they can't. And sharing is a great, it's a great talking point. It's a great idea, but down here, first, what I see certainly is most of the cars aren't really interested in sharing. They're saying, they're okay with bikes on the road, whether they be analog or electric, as long as they're not in the way. And that's just going to be something that's going to take time. But I think COVID has accelerated this a bit. So, and it's just going to continue. There's no question in my mind about it. But we got a lot of work to do and a long way to go. And the only thing I can say, one thing I would say is for the infrastructure project is Bicycle Coalition of Maine has and some of you may already know this or probably do, what they call community spokes, and they'll actually provide training to help people learn how to advocate for change in their community. I'm a community spoke here in Kittery. And so whatever
we've got a couple on this call.
Great. So, the more we can promote that program, I think the better, because really what it's going to take is the loud voice, the squeaky wheel, and it's got to be bigger numbers of people putting pressure on to make the changes that are needed to accelerate bicycling and pedestrian infrastructure. And it's just as simple as that. The more people we can get engaged, the better chance we have of success. And it's going to be a hard pull. So
that's great. Thank you. We just had one of our advisory board members is transportation planner, and we just went through a big conversation with the town of Norway and the state around closing a bike lane out here. And it's interesting how people the car drivers and people don't want to see that change so much. Well, thanks, Steve. And thanks again for bringing all the bikes up. I am so smitten with this one, and everybody, I've got one of Steve's bikes here, an Urban Arrow Longtail, and it is such a sweet ride. I have hardly been driving my car since you left that bike up here. And I think you started to do a good step for Barry about the electric vehicle adoption, and the dealers. What do you think, Barry? Pushed back from dealers because of that?
I think Steve is correct. I think the parts and service issue has been an ongoing thing, and I think it depends. I mean, there are some dealers that get it, and that seems to be true across the country. But I think what they can't deny is that, you know, when they look at Tesla and the success that Tesla has been having with their line of products, that all the manufacturers realize that they're at a disadvantage if they don't start converting technology and start doing it quickly. And that's probably going to be painful for dealers, because that may also include some of Tesla's revolutionary business model, you know, with direct sales. So I think I'd agree with Steve. I think the dealership model has been a very big obstacle to date.
We sure have had a hard time getting them to come to the expo. And when they do send somebody, they're usually like, everybody there knows more about the car than they do. They just kind of like stand to the side and go, yeah, drive it, whatever. It's like.
But I also think a lot of it is just there's not been as much product. There's not been as many options for consumers when they go into these showrooms, and that's also a disadvantage for dealers too. So
cool.
A little bit of both.
By the way, everybody, Barry is from Revision Energy. I believe he's the director of electric
vehicle innovation.
Electric vehicle innovation, and he's got a pretty cool slideshow, at least the title slide. So you want to take us through the?
I'll tee it up. Shall I tee it up, Scott?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, let's see if we get that to go. Can you see it okay?
It just came in. You got it.
Perfect.
There it is. Thank you.
All right. Well, Scott, I have utmost respect for you and Renee and Fred and the whole crew with CEB. I mean, you've really done a remarkable consciousness raising exercise in Western Maine. And that goes across many different topic areas. But certainly in the electric vehicle space, I'm really pleased with what you've accomplished the last many years, and I can't believe it's been 6 years since we did that event. So I really appreciate the chance to continue the discussion with you guys, and I do look forward to the future, and I certainly look forward to seeing what you're able to accomplish in the near term. So. This is a slide I was telling Scott that my graphic design son, who was living in LA at the time, came up with, hence I think the really hyper-urban background. But I do think that we're in a remarkable stage of transformation, and it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I do think 2030, we're going to see some pretty remarkable things to come out of this, what I'd term as sort of the larger beneficial electrification movement. Which Maine has got going in many other states, and basically in a nutshell, it's the transition away from all forms of fossil fuel into electricity, which offers many different opportunities to provide clean forms of generation. So, you know, Scott's earlier slide about Maine having 54% of the GHG greenhouse gas emissions, the result of the transportation sector, is frightening. Except that we have a tool now that we can use to address that. And the other thing to be aware of is there's, I think, about 29% or so of Maine GHG is the built environment, whether that's heating and other sources. And I'm going to touch on in this presentation, I think, a little bit of everything to kind of plant the seeds for you guys to be thinking creatively. But I do think that the clean transportation and you know, the built environment are going to intersect here more and more and provide opportunities to reduce GHG in both of those spaces. So that's, I think, something that we need to look forward to. So I'm going to try to breeze through this because I know it's in the evening and we've got a lot of people we'd like to hear from. So first thing, I want to make sure I can progress the slides. There we go. So you probably all know a little bit about Revision. I'll just say real quick, I mean, we're at about 270 people, Maine, Mass, and New Hampshire. Our biggest mission is to transition away from fossil fuels. We're a certified B Corp, and we're also 100% employee owned. So each one of us, I think, takes some direct responsibility in whatever roles we may have with the company. And it's a really interesting company, and it makes me feel good about getting up in the morning and spending a lot of time on these issues. So I appreciate the chance to sponsor. We appreciate the chance to sponsor CEBE and keep promoting clean technologies. You know, back in 2011, I was living in Oregon and I bought one of the first Leafs. It was a 24 kilowatt hour Leaf. I think I could maybe get 80 miles with a tailwind. of range. And my wife thought it was crazy. Actually, I was leasing it. She thought it would be crazy to buy one of those cars for, it was 30 grand with that kind of range. And I thought, no, I think this is the future. This is what people are going to want. But I think in retrospect, she was absolutely right. I mean, that was the beginning of this whole thing, and getting a car that only gets 80 miles of range doesn't seem that practical for lots of people. I think it ultimately, it still is practical. I'm not sure at that price point, but I think it is still ultimately practical. But what's really happening now in the light duty passenger space is, you know, we're seeing the battery technology improve, the costs coming down. And, you know, there was a time where a lot of us were trying to bet on what was the range that was going to be needed for these vehicles to really inspire consumers to purchase them. And I think that there was a time where it was 150 miles, and then it was 200 miles. And, you know, now we're at 230, 250 miles, 60 kilowatt hour batteries. And I think it's going to be 100. I think, you know, it's, and maybe more, which translates into, you know, 100 kilowatt hour battery translates into 400, basically 400 miles of usable range, give or take. And, you know, we're seeing these cars, you know, that I'm displaying on this slide, which represent, you know, of the 50 some odd plugins. I think there's something like 9 or 10 of them here. Most of them are priced pretty aggressively, but we've got the Leaf, the Bolt, the Kona, the Nero. And so even now, I mean, I think, you know, for people who are looking at vehicles and looking at all electrics, there's an opportunity, you know, to find a vehicle that fits their needs. Obviously, that's going to continue to improve. The other interesting thing that we're starting to see is as the battery prices go down, we're starting to see it begin to translate into other types of vehicles. I was just down at the Greater Portland Metro this week, getting ready to do some bidding on putting in charging infrastructure for what's going to be this bus, all electric transit bus. They've got 3 of them set to be delivered in August of next year. And they have, as you're going to see, I mean, they have massive batteries. They can charge on 150 kilowatt hour DC fast chargers, or they have this thing they call the pantograph. That's an overhead charger that latches on hydraulically to the back, and it's like a 450 kilowatt charger. Man, I mean, it's almost like getting hit by lightning. I mean, that's what the technology for these larger heavy duty vehicles is, you know, is moving towards, and they're going to become increasingly economically viable. The drivers love them. They're quiet. They've got really good torque. So this is, I think, the future of public transportation. And of course, we've seen buses like this is a part of Lion Electric out of Quebec. And this is a bus that was in Concord, Mass. They did a big pilot a couple of years ago. And, you know, Bluebird, Thomas Bus, I think. I mean, all of them, there's like 5 major bus manufacturers. And there's something like 800,000 school buses in the United States. So, you know, we are starting to see, you know, the battery technology economics allow for transition into even these types of vehicles. And then, you know, we have heavy duty vehicles, which I think people thought that was a pipe dream, because, you know, it was almost like half the payload would have to be batteries to make these things, you know, cover range. And that's not true. I had a meeting a week ago with Daimler Chrysler out of Portland, Oregon, who is doing a pilot with utilities along I-5 in California, Oregon, and Washington to try to figure out what kind of public charging infrastructure do they need to put in medium and heavy duty trucking. And they have a really interesting study that, if you're interested in reading, I can get to you, that's talking about every 50 miles putting in large public charging for medium duty trucks, and every 100 miles putting large public charging clusters in for these, you know, long distance tractors. And Daimler is actually talking about a 1 megawatt charger per truck. And the sites that they're speccing are like 23 chargers per site. So in some of these rural locations, you're talking about having to have the utilities build actual substations just to power what's going to be the long distance travel, the long distance trucking industry. And they're talking about that in I-95. and starting to reach out to our utilities and other utilities along that corridor to get them to start thinking ahead, because these trucks are due out in the next 5 years, and it's going to take 5 years to get the infrastructure in place to support them. So unlike typical fleets, where they'll charge at the terminal where the vehicles are kept, these are tractor trailers that charge on the road, and so it's going to be a public resource that we've got to start thinking about, and the utilities are going to have to start thinking about, and it's a massive amount of electricity. So that's really interesting. The thing that really captivates me and that got me interested in transportation electrification was the batteries. And you look at the size of the batteries that it takes to get these vehicles to meet their transportation applications. And so we get the Chevy Bolt, which right now is at 60, but that's going to go to 100. You've got pickups that are going to probably be twice that, and then of course these larger medium heavy duty vehicles, massive amounts of storage capacity. And I think the thing about the electric vehicles is that that it's not just transportation. When you look at what the scale of this is going to look like, this is a Bloomberg prediction, and this is before Elon Musk last week announced a $25,000 all electric that gets 300 miles. So I think this hockey stick adoption curve is going to be even steeper. So it's quite conceivable by 2030 we're going to be meeting the 35% of new vehicle sales. I mean, California last week announced 2035 no more combustion vehicle sales. So we're right at the very beginning of a massive deployment. So one of the things about this slide that I think is important to say is when you're talking about light duty, think about the numbers on the left. I mean, you're talking about 100 million, 200 million, 300 million. 300 million vehicles, each of them with a 100 kilowatt hour battery, represents a massive amount of storage. I was on a panel today and with a company called Fermata that's doing some V2G stuff, vehicle to grid stuff. And they said that all of the Nissan Leafs that have been sold to date, just the Nissan Leaf, which has been a pretty good selling car, but maybe 15,000 units a year, cumulatively, those Leafs have more storage than all of the existing US storage in the storage industry for utilities combined. Just the Leaf. We're not even talking about the Tesla or the Bolt. I mean, just the Leaf. So we're at the cusp of having batteries literally in everybody's backyard. And so what that opens up, go back to the original conversation about greenhouse gas reduction, is we have vehicle to grid integration through charging that will allow us to tap those batteries, not just for demand response, which is where we are right now, which means that the utility can dial back the charge of the car if everybody's got their air conditioners on and we're hitting a peak. But what we're really rapidly moving into is applications that allow us to tap the battery bidirectionally. So it's not only taking the electricity, but it's giving back as needed into the grid to meet brownout needs that California's been getting, or in the built environment, like many of us might have experienced a little bit of wind-based power outage in the last couple of days. Instead of having your Generac generator that kicks in every week obnoxiously to test itself and then it backs up your panel, your car sitting there, can be both your transportation and your lifesaver for binging on Netflix on your computer. So, it's a pretty remarkable transition. That's something that Revision and anybody in the clean energy world needs to be thinking about, because the electricity for the cars is only as clean as the generation source, which means if we can convert to renewables rapidly, there goes the GHG production that we're complaining about. And in fact, cost of solar has come down remarkably. It's a lot cheaper to charge a car than it is to gas it up, even with grid-based electricity, and it's even more cheap when you can use your own solar. And if that's on your house, that's great. But you don't even have to have it on your house. You can have it now on a community solar farm. And, you know, these cars are a pretty large load, but if you have shares in a community solar farm, you can size your share not based on your roof space, but based on what your electricity needs are going to be. And if you have 2 Teslas like Fred has, you know, I mean, I don't know how much roof space you need, but I mean, you're going to run out of it, and you're not going to be building another house just to charge your cars. So, you know, I mean, this whole notion of, you know, creating a flexible source of electricity off-site for every consumer is actually really, really a remarkable part of this whole transition.
Barry, Fred has his own community solar farm just for his cars that's remote from his house. And you can see a tour of it. We just did a tour of Fred's personal solar farm yesterday. That will be available on our website very soon, so you can see Fred talk about he has a tracker and a ground mount just to power all his cars.
Fred is the poster child for the future. He has miraculously stopped the aging process through the benefits of electricity. So I think this is like my last slide, but I mean, you know, this is Nissan. You know, Nissan is working with charging manufacturers and software providers to come up with a way to aggregate, you know, all the Nissan batteries, and, you know, that translates into money. The utility, you know, if the utility doesn't have to fire up dirty generation and they can tap your car, they're going to pay you for it. So, you know, and your car is only sitting around 90% of the time anyway. So why not use it as a battery? So, I mean, that to me is actually a pretty remarkable, you know, future development. So
that's great.
A lot of stuff going on, and I'll quiet, and hopefully I've primed the pump of your imagination a little bit here. So
thank you so much. And the question about batteries is you know, huge in this whole arena. And I know that Fred was just, Steve had just asked a question about the batteries and lithium supply available. And I know that Fred has just on a webinar or something the other day with Tesla, and he was talking about the future of batteries and lithium and that stuff. So maybe Fred, you could start out talking about that a little bit. But first, let me just introduce Fred Garbo, again, Norway's EVangelist, also a solar installer with Garbo Kane Integrated Solar Builders, another sponsor tonight, as well as Steve and Barry. Yeah, we were just doing a solar tour. I did some video of Fred talking about his whole solar infrastructure. He also did a test drive of his Tesla Model X that's available on our website as well. So you can learn a lot about what Fred's trip is there. But Fred, talk about the battery thing with Tesla.
Yeah, I'll get into the battery thing in a sec. Elon Musk, who has built Tesla and SpaceX and everything, had a huge battery day that we were all anticipating, as he mentioned this months and months ago. And last Monday, he talked about this new battery and building a different kind of battery that was tabless and going to be 56% cheaper. And you can check out Tesla's website. It's going to be an amazing thing. And as Barry mentioned, it would get an incredible electric car out there on the market in a couple of years for 25 grand, which would change everything. There'd be no need to buy an ICE vehicle, an internal combustion engine vehicle, when this great Tesla model would be just $25,000. I guess I'll back up and say that all of these people that I know in this chat are friends of mine, which has really been the best thing that's happened to me for years in doing solar or having an electric car. Is I met Barry at an event that Tony Giambro and I went up to in Montreal for electric vehicles. And same with putting up solar for people like Mike Newsom, who is on the chat. I do insurance there. Is my community has now changed to where all of us are making a motion towards driving electric vehicles, having solar, doing renewables, checking in with CB once a week. So I was fortunate enough and silly enough to tell my dad, who was an engineer, that if they ever built an electric car that was commercially viable, I would buy it. So in 2011, when the Nissan Leaf was first making it to the States, I waited one more year and asked, I put down $100 deposit for a Nissan Leaf in 2012. And I think I was just the first one to buy one. And that another great dentist in Portland leased his. And I might have been the first one to buy one. And in those old days, the only place to charge it was my house, because I bought a charger that was 220 to charge it up a little faster. And then the Nissan dealer in Portland, and then a Nissan dealer in Lewiston. So I would always take my bicycle because it would be a good 3 or 4 hours before I could make it back home. I had to ride around and do something. And to this day, even in my Tesla, I carry an electric scooter because while you're charging, you're always doing something else. And for folks that have gotten into electric cars, you know, there's this wonderful thing about charge time now. And I really refer to it as slow driving. Instead of being in this incredible hurry to get to places, I've been fortunate enough to go to amazing charging spots that I will return to. And folks that charge now around our community and venture forth, it's just a whole different way of thinking, really. And a lot of the people on tonight's chat have driven electric or have made this transition. So yeah, the thing with batteries, I have 2 Teslas now, and that's Tony's fault. And my gal Alyssa had been making a very long commute in a Volkswagen e-Golf that Tony Giambro, who has now found this incredible model with Paris Auto Barn of dealing with cars that come off lease, or that there's this used market for pre-owned electric vehicles, found a car for me that was in Seattle and got thrown out there into the auction circuit. He found a Kia Soul that was in Georgia, and they found me a Volkswagen e-Golf. And I, at the time, really didn't need another car. I had a clunky van and the Nissan Leaf. But he found this e-Golf in Florida and found a driver that had dropped off cars. And so suddenly we were both driving these cool electric cars that got 100 miles to them. Alyssa took that car and put 60,000 miles on it. It got 100 miles to a charge. And then around Christmas, it looked like she was going to be driving quite a bit to Camden to her folks to take care of them. And charging for an hour or a couple hours in Augusta was slowing down her time to be with her family. And Tony started looking for a pre-owned Tesla Model S. And I flew down on New Year's Day to South Carolina and picked up a car that I luckily called the auction, and the guy plugged it in for me the night before. And I was able to get to the auction before the auction opened, pick up this Model S, and found that it had free supercharging on it, and made it to Atlanta and did 5 stops and got back to Maine. And for Alyssa, the best thing was it had a sunroof. So yes, I am now a person that owns that. We own 2 Teslas and the original Nissan Leaf that I got in 2012. And with Tony Giambro, we are going to fix the battery in this car with one that we found, a Nissan Leaf that was in an accident. So we're going to try and take the older battery and mix it up with other old Nissan Leafs. And I'm going to do a transplant and put a 2013 battery in my 2012 Leaf and keep it going for as long as I can. That is my local car. I jump in it all the time. When I don't need to tow things, business happened because Revision Energy, who Barry works with, came to my house, and I was told that this Nissan Leaf was being charged off the dirty grid. And Revision's idea was, well, why not do solar to fuel your car? And I didn't have a great space to do that because I lived in the woods. And I had investigated this company in Vermont called All Earth Renewables, and they built a solar tracker that moved. And I'd grown up doing showbiz and being an acrobat and moving. So I figured, why not go with something that also moved? Revision came up and put this tracker on Farmer Rick's property. So I have maybe a mini solar farm. Scott came over and looked at it. And because of this, I grabbed Sean Kane, and Scott had asked me to do a timber frame. And the more we talked, the more we realized, instead of driving to Portland every day to work for Revision, maybe we should start our own business. So for the last 6 years, I've been installing solar and learning a ton about that and sitting in people's living rooms and seeing that possibility of having your own power to run a heat pump, your hot water heater, your whole home. So I've been joyous in doing this. It's been a great result. And the Tesla happened when I called up Barry maybe 3 years ago. Tony and I and a bunch of us went to Massachusetts to buy, to put our deposit down for a Model 3. And the guy walks out of the Tesla store. We had gotten there at 4 in the morning to be first in line. No one had even seen what the Model 3 was going to look like. And the guy comes out of the Tesla store and says, you can buy 2 if you have the deposit money. And I get on the phone to Barry. This is true, Barry. And would you like to buy a Model 3? I'll put the money down for you. And while Barry and I and all of us were waiting for the Model 3 to show up, the Model X could tow 5,000 pounds. The van that I had died. And I jumped in instead of waiting till I was really old. And I got a Model X that could tow. And we've been using it to tow many different trailers with pallets of panels, and maybe one of the only companies in Maine that drives electric to its jobs. The other car was a Bolt. I know Revision drives a lot of Priuses and Bolts and lets people try them. And that's really the only reason I ended up with a Model X, was out of function. And it's one of the best things I ever did. So people thinking of getting a new electric car now, or wanting an electric car to travel with, I would certainly recommend a Tesla, because I've driven others.
What do you think of the charging network, Tesla's charging network generally?
Yeah, it's beyond comparison, because of these other vehicles I've owned since 2012. I have waited and driven to many a charging spot that I've looked up on an app and gotten there only to find that the charger doesn't work, or that somebody else has parked there, it's iced in, there's another vehicle there. I mean, how many times has this happened to all of us that got started years ago? And now when I am with the Tesla, the car tells me where the chargers are, tells me to slow down to 75 if I'm out in Montana, that I'll make my next charger, which is only 50 miles away if I slow down a little bit. Everything is basically in the Tesla, which is an incredible computer on wheels. And the gift of this car, and Elon being so strong with developing batteries and making all of us move towards renewable energy, is his vision does the simplest, darndest things. I get in a Tesla, I don't have to have a key anymore. I don't have to push a start button. That may seem like ridiculous. Like, what big deal is that? But as soon as you start driving a Tesla, when the easiest things are so easy, I get in, I step on the brake, the door closes, the car's already started. A new upgrade just came. Every couple of weeks you get an upgrade. Your car gets better with time. My Tesla has 85,000 miles on it. And I just got an update last week that, let me unlock the car every time I came home. I didn't have to walk out to the car with the fob. It just, it has a romance mode where I can turn on the screen and a fire comes up, and a crackling fire video comes up on the screen of my car when I went to pick up Tony coming back from somewhere with a whole bunch of people, and they walk up to the car at the Boston airport and there's a fire inside the car crackling. You push the sound button and swanky music comes up. So the fact that this thing I bought gets better every single day just blows my mind. So that's why I'm trying to power it with solar. And that's why I have 2 Teslas. And this $25,000 one in 2 years is gaining. Every time the next version of it comes out, the smarter it is. It's really been phenomenal, and I enjoy it every single day.
Fred, do you find people ice the Tesla chargers, or is it such a remarkable visual, construction that they don't even think of like taking Tesla spaces?
Strangely enough and wonderfully enough, for the last 2 years, it's been on the Tesla map that a supercharger system was going to be built in Bethel. And I just thought that was a dream. And finally, they're there. There's 6 superchargers in Bethel, and they put them in the wrong place. As an EV driver for the last 9 years, they put them too close to the front door of the Irving station. So every time I do go there to charge, people pull in to go grab something in the store, and they don't care that it says Tesla charging. And the discussions I've had with them is I'm going to leave in a minute. And there aren't 6 Teslas sitting there at every single charger. But in a couple years, there will be.
Well, that's Tesla's fault, and they don't seem to look for feedback much when they're citing. The first one that they put in, remember, that was like across from the Augusta Civic Center up in the middle of a parking lot.
Right.
So.
People are really glad that it's near Target. I've heard other people say it. It's near Home Depot. Just the other coolest thing about Tesla that Barry's brought up is these superchargers are in the vehicle. So you don't have to get out an app on your phone. You never have to get out a credit card or an RFID card to make the charger work, to get the plug out of the charger for CCS, which is combined charging service. You plug in your Tesla, the Tesla system knows it's you. It debits from your credit card, or in my case, one of the bennies of buying a car that costs more was that I get free supercharging for the life of the vehicle. So I've eliminated fuel from my nut these days, and that I charge at home from solar, or I go to superchargers and don't deal with fuel anymore. That's been the gift. And so the superchargers that went into Bethel, specifically for people that buy a Model 3 or a Model Y now, they charge at 250 amps. The charger itself has water cooling in it. The cord isn't this big anymore. It's like this. It never gets hot because the charger itself is water cooling the electricity going into your car. Tony can pull up with his Model 3 and get 200 miles in 15 minutes. It's really eliminated this whole idea that charging takes longer than getting gas. If you can get 200 miles in 15 minutes, you're going to jump to the next charger if you're on a road trip. And if there's a charger in every 150 miles, that's what they've done. There's more than 17,000 Tesla chargers. So when I made the jump to getting a Tesla versus the Leaf and the VW e-Golf, it was astronomical how I never had to worry about charging ever again. So rarely do I come upon superchargers that are broken. And if they're broken, Tesla tells you they're going to take care of it. So you don't even have to put a note on PlugShare. Charger A1 is trashed. Things get fixed and they come to your house if something breaks in your car. There are no dealers. You know, I ordered the vehicle. The guy showed up in my driveway, gave me the key fob, and said, "Good luck." So that was pretty unbelievable. And mobile Tesla has been here to fix a sensor in the door. I've had to go to Watertown a couple times or other things, but otherwise, tires. That's it. Tires. Take it away, Scott. That was enough of a blab.
You know, yeah. So I'm looking at who's on the call here, and there's 3 of you that have these long range cars, and there's 3 of us that have these short range cars.
Right.
And, you know, Mike brought up a good point. It's like, you know, for most of us, I have a Smart for 2. It goes, you know, like in the summer, I can, you know, I just hit, like I broke the 90 mark the other day on the Guessometer. It was huge. You know, I'm having a little competition with my friend, but, you know, it averages like 60, 70 miles on a charge in the dead of winter from running heat, maybe 40 or 50. It gets me everywhere I need to go. So Mike's point is like, you know, do we all need to be hauling around, you know, 1,000 pounds of batteries and all the embodied energy that went into making those long range cars? So are they going to keep making short range electric vehicles, or are they all just going to go, you know, with all these huge batteries?
Well, you know, one point that I would make on that is that if you think about the battery element of the vehicle, and the biggest complaint about renewable energy, you know, was lack of storage, because if you didn't use the, you know, if you didn't use the electron, you lost it. So in some ways, you know, one of the virtues actually is having the larger battery for non-transportation applications, like making solar actually economical, or wind economical, because you can charge now when the generation source is going.
Right.
You know?
So we need a smart grid. We need to adapt our grid as quickly as possible to be as smart enough to be able to handle all this stuff. And then, you know, before we couldn't possibly avoid the question of lithium here. You know, there's lithium is a mined substance. A, do you think there's enough of it out there? And B, can we mine it ecologically and not, you know, trash other parts of the world, especially in the global south where this lithium is available, which seems to be a big issue for a lot of folks.
Well, I mean, I wish I wasn't part of the human condition many days. And I think about the trade-offs of one technology versus another. You know, if we eliminate all oil drilling, offshore oil drilling, and we convert those sins into, you know, mining lithium, I don't know. Maybe it's the devil's trade, but I think we know that battery technology is constantly changing. There's significant efforts being made by vehicle manufacturers to come up with sustainable, recyclable materials as part of their construction. So these cars actually, I think, have the aura of ongoing improvement you know, not only in terms of the technology, but in terms of the burden that it places on the environment. I mean, that really is, I think, you know, I think if you look at Tesla and other companies that are striving to get their batteries, you know, more sustainable, I think that is part of the new, maybe I'm hallucinating, but I think it's part of the new ethos for manufacturers who are going to treat this seriously. So, I mean, I think it is an issue. I don't think we can ever be clean enough. But at the same time, there's a choice that we have to make, and we know that carbon is a major issue right now. Lithium is not.
Right.
Yeah,
And,
if you go
know,
back to look
your
at
point
Elon,
about-
sorry, Scott, if you go back to look
No,
at,
I was just going to point about storage and using cars to stabilize the grid and to, you know, level out loads and stuff is, and power your house in place of a generator and all that stuff does make a lot of sense. Make me feel better about my next EV because I'm going to get one that goes farther.
Yeah.
Probably. What were you going to say, Fred?
yeah, there are companies, there's one in Montreal right now building a inverter that will do V2G on almost any electric car right now. So Barry's point about why are we dragging around all these big batteries when they could be used to help the grid is coming. I think that'll really be the next wave. And to go back, as soon as you do get a car, Scott, that goes more than 100 miles, it'll just change this feeling of should I turn on the heat that's gone away with me in the last 2 years. You know, this whole thing of having to put on my parka to get in my car has left. And now I can think of other things, and autopilot's strong and has saved me from hitting a deer a couple times. So the technology and the fact that you're driving around a computer is helpful. The fact that my battery in my car might be able to run my house instead of buying a Powerwall is coming. Elon's building a better battery, and you can go back and watch Battery Day, which was fascinating. It was way too technical over my head, but his idea of building batteries that are, you know, down to $56 a kilowatt instead of 158 is going to make all of this really get going sooner. So it'll happen.
Well, you know, and the sad thing is that we're going to continue to experience extreme weather events where
Yes.
the existing grid is going to be subject to greater and greater stress. So, you know, the car is actually, you know, perhaps part of the solution to some of the climate, you know, action issues that we need to embrace in terms of adaptation and so forth. Which is it's a sad fact, I think, but it's a fact. So.
Well, we've just about used up our hour. I guess we have. And if anybody has one last burning question, here's your chance. But other than that, thanks guys for coming out. And it's just hard to believe that in 8 years since Fred got his car, 9 years, took me for my first ride. Now you can never look out the window here in Norway and without seeing electric cars around. And there's always cars on our charger, and it's happening. So.
Hey, Fred, I'd love to see a quiet solar groomer at Robert's farm.
Yeah, and yesterday, which is incredible news, is Zero Motorcycles just signed a 10-year contract with Polaris. And there's a company already in Montreal called Tygo that makes an electric snowmobile, Carl, which would be silent in the woods. And now that Polaris is on board, and they're going to use the 10 years of the technology that Zero Motorcycles has been cooking on for, you know, level 2 charging on all their motorcycles. And, you know, it's going to be a good handshake between the two of them, because Polaris already has the infrastructure to make four-wheelers, you know, tracked vehicles that can be in the outdoors that will be silent. Not that, you know, all the hunters will be out there doing stealth, but just as Carl says, there will be a silent groomer at Robert's farm soon. And for 15 grand, I can, you and I can go up to Montreal this next year and buy one from Tygo and have a snowmobile that could haul a groomer. And we'll drive it into town.
It's not just the noise. If you ski in the woods where there's snowmobiles, you just are breathing, like you can taste the air for an hour after those things go through. That's going to be huge.
Yeah, so no, this yesterday it was just signed up with Zero and Polaris, a 10-year union to start building vehicles that will be all electric.
Every week is more good news. That's great. That's exciting. Yeah.
This is a good news crowd here.
Yeah, Walmart just bought 15 Tesla semis this morning at my 3 o'clock look at the news thing. Okay, Walmart's buying 15 Tesla semis. Okay, good. That was just today. Tomorrow they're going to buy 100.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to walk. You got to walk before you can run.
Yeah,
You got to get that 2012 Leaf before you can get the Tesla X. That's
that was it. That was my path. It was a wonderful, wonderful journey, and it's getting better.
Well, I miss seeing you guys
have
in
both
person.
been a
Yeah,
huge
that's true.
inspiration for all of us, and see you in a year.
All right. And
Thanks,
or
Barry.
sooner, I
Thanks
hope.
again.
Good to see you all. Everybody
All
who signed in. Thanks, Renee, for hosting, and Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Really good to see you, Barry.
Yeah, good to see you guys too. Fred, Renee, Scott,
All right.
thank you. Okay.
Later.
Take care, guys.